My name is Monika Sarkar. I'm a transplant hepatologist at the University of California, San Francisco. I think one important message for our patients is that we are all human and we all deal with the anxiety and the overwhelm of what we're encountering in our day-to-day lives. And we're not immune from it either. I think it's also important to know that as human beings taking care of our patients, we too feel the overwhelm, the uncertainty, and have to really ask ourselves, what are we doing best to help support our own mental well-being? There was one day when I remember walking to a room with a patient and I was so short-tempered. I was exhausted and I was drained and I just felt like they weren't hearing me and I wasn't hearing them. And I left the room and I was like, wow, that wasn't the best interaction I've ever had. And I went back later just to say, hey, this morning I had a really hard day. And so really laying it on the table to let them know that you're human and you're connecting to them as a human, as well as a provider that has their best interest in mind and getting them the best medical care we can, getting them to transplant if that's, what's going to be in their best interest. I can't say that I do. And I even in those moments where I'm really showing more vulnerability, part of me is like, oh, did I cross a line? I am the provider, you are the patient. And so you want to be there so that they feel like you don't have these uncertainties that you're carrying and spilling over into your care plan for them, so that you feel like you're, as the expert in the organ and in the medical care, able to manage things with your fund of knowledge. But at the same time, stepping back and realizing that there are natural uncertainties. Going back to an earlier comment about really just checking in with yourself and seeing where are you landing right now, you'll really know when is it appropriate to be like, I felt like that. I understand where you're coming from. And then also knowing where, no, have I ever had end organ disease? Have I ever been on a transplant list? No. And so I can only imagine what this feels like from times in my own life when I felt total overwhelm, uncertainty, not knowing what things were going to look like in a day, in a week, in a month. I think it's very important for us to be able to step back and validate how our patients are feeling, because it's not that there's this lack of gratitude for what they've been offered before, but what they're experiencing now is really hard, is really devastating, is really disappointing. And we can't overlook that. And I think to really let our patients thrive the best they can, as they may potentially be going through their second or third evaluation for a transplant, they are going to thrive best when they're seen and heard. To go through a process where you're having end organ disease, you're dealing with the uncertainty of if you're going to survive to make it to transplants, what that's going to be like for your family members, for caregiver burden, for the financial obligations. It's a lot of emotions to take on. And I think that we as transplant providers need to normalize this and explain that this is something that is so commonly experienced by our patients going through this journey. A lot of people expect after transplant, I'm going to feel so much better. I'm going to be back to how I was before, but like maybe I don't have a sexual drive anymore. Maybe I'm feeling more depressed. Maybe I'm having concerns with how my body looks now, and I feel uncomfortable with that aspect. So there's so many components of what it means to be on the flip side, on the other side of transplant, where you may have some disappointments. And I think we have to acknowledge that for our patients. And it's important to recognize that you might not feel like, yourself how you were 10 years prior to transplant in that initial post-transplant period, or even a year, 2 years after, or maybe never. But really kind of resetting what our expectations are and framing it, understanding where our patients are coming from and validate how they're feeling. Because I think if they feel like they're heard, it helps so much for them to feel like, okay, yeah, there's other people who feel like this too. This is my doctor. They see that my graft is functioning really well, but there's other parts that aren't going so great. I don't have to be ashamed about that. I don't have to feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm not feeling better than I should have felt. And I think it really opens the door to our patients also feeling comfortable accessing resources to start feeling better and resetting those expectations and giving themselves a little bit of grace too.